we've covered the first half of step 1, and we've covered from the title page up to the doctor's opinion. Since that, this morning, we've covered what happens after I take a drink, from the doctor's opinion to the top of 23, and what happens when I don't have any alcohol in my system at all and I go back to the first drink. We've covered the body and the mind, the physical craving and the mental obsession. Knowing who they were writing this to, and that things need to be repeated in lots of different ways, which was a principle that Bill used a lot. On page 44, you'll find that he repeats the same 2 pertinent points they've just spent 53 pages getting across. And I say 53 pages because we've covered about 10 pages in the doctor's opinion and 43 pages that were numbered. So in 53 pages in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. I would like to take that one step further and say I hope you've experienced your own alcoholism. They hope they've made clear the distinction between you and the non-alcoholic. And here's the 2 important points they've covered in 53 pages. When you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, which means stay stopped, which is about the mind. Or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, which is about the craving, you're probably alcoholic. Let's stop there for a second. I'm going to present you with a consideration. The people that wrote this book that we've had contact with, Mark and I, that were around back then, say that they put in several places what are called drunk traps. Knowing who they were writing this to, it's written by drunks, to drunks, for drunks. They put here in several places drunk traps. Probably, maybe, rarely. Different places where if you're looking for a way... So what do we mean by a drunk trap? Different places where if you're looking for a way out, they'll give it to you. Or if you're not sure and you have some doubt, they'll give you a place where you can explore that. So I'd like to read the text, and I'd like to ask you, what word do you think somebody you might be working with would go to who wasn't clear on either the craving or the obsession? One of the 2 they're not clear on. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, what would be the word somebody would go to and say, see, you don't have to have the craving and the obsession, you just have to have one or the other. What's the word they would focus on? Or. Well, that's not true. That's a drunk trap. Because here's the problem. Let's say you get the obsession, but you don't get the craving. Well, next time you get the obsession, just drink the way you want. Or, let's say you get the craving, but you don't get the obsession. Well, then make up your mind never to drink again, and that craving will never happen. See, it ain't or. To be powerless over alcohol, you got to have both. I also need to say this. I've never seen an alcoholic, and I've worked with hundreds, I've never seen an alcoholic that has one and not the other. But it's a great place if you're not clear. This statement, I believe, will show you what you need to go back to. If when you honestly want to, you can't quit entirely, if you're not sure about that, go back over 23 to 43. So with that statement, when you honestly want to, you can't quit entirely, mark 23 to 43. And that's where you need to go back if you're not sure about that. When drinking, you have little control over the amount. That's the doctor's opinion to 23. If you're not sure about that, go back to the doctor's opinion to 23. So I would say no one should go past this page unless they're sure that when they honestly want to, they can't quit entirely, and when drinking, they have little control over the amount. Now we're going to throw a consideration in that some people have to spend more time on than they did the craving or the obsession. And that is, if you turn it into a question, do you believe you're suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer? I think once you're clear on the craving and the obsession, there's more on page 44 and 45 than any 2 pages we've covered so far. Let's look at the number of considerations that are on this page. I have seen guys and women have to spend more time on this last consideration than they did the craving or the obsession. And that is, do you really believe that you have an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer? Is there the right woman? Is there the right man? Is there the right amount of money? Is there the right job? Is there anything you can come up with other than a spiritual experience that's going to conquer your alcoholism.
And you can look at where you're right at today in terms of how long you've been sober. And if you've just been going to meetings and not working these steps and seeking God, then your experience is confirming you think you're suffering from an illness, and you don't have to have a spiritual experience. Let your experience show you where you're at with that. And here's what I want you to look at. If you've been doing that, like I did my first 3 years, you know why I did that? Because I had never found out my truth in step 1. When I found out my truth in step 1, I had to consider my God. There is nothing left for me but a spiritual experience. That took away any debate I was going to have with you about God, right? See what I'm saying? So look at your experience right now today sitting in this room and ask yourself, because the program of recovery is outlined in the book, if you haven't been going through this book with someone, seeking this power through these steps, then maybe you're sitting here thinking you suffer from an illness and you don't need a spiritual experience to treat that illness.
Let's talk about the mechanics of this section. We'll call this section 4, and we'll call this the second half of step 1, and we'll call this the spirit. So we've taken the first step in 3 parts. Body, that's the physical craving. Mind, that's the mental obsession. That's the powerlessness, the first half of step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, bodily and mentally. Dash, that our lives had become unmanageable spiritually. This is the spiritual malady. This is the second half of step 1. 2 things I'd like you to consider. This is actually a state of consciousness that takes place before you ever drank, when alcohol wasn't working, and further away from your last drink than you've ever been, sober. This is a state of consciousness that exists except when spirits poured on it work. This is the stuff you pour booze on to make it go away. So there's 3 terms I'd like you to write down, and the 3 terms are unmanageability, spiritual malady, and untreated alcoholism. And here's the question I'd like you to ask yourself. Are these 3 separate terms, or are they terms that describe the same thing? Are these terms synonymous, or are these terms separate? And here's what I'd like to present to you. I believe these 3 terms describe the same thing. I believe they're synonymous. I believe the unmanageability is the spiritual malady, and I believe the spiritual malady is untreated alcoholism, and vice versa. I'd also like you to consider another question. Is this condition internal or external? Because here's what I'd like you all to get free of. The unmanageability of your life is not outside of you, in circumstance or emotion. The unmanageability is a deeper state of consciousness that transcends circumstance or emotion. It is a malady of the human spirit, beyond body, mind, or emotion. For example, you ever had all your ducks in a row and your life on the outside was almost perfect and you were still screwed inside? There was an emptiness. Have you ever been in a large crowd and felt terribly alone? Have you ever had everything out here just the way you'd like it and had an emptiness inside? And have you ever been emotionally at peace with still an emptiness underneath it? It's my contention that this part of the first step, as we just did with the other 2 parts of the first step, this part of the first step also has nothing to do with the outside circumstance or your emotional state. I would like you to use 3 pages. All of page 44, half of page 45, up to lack of power is our dilemma, and only the middle paragraph on page 52. I would like you to continue to turn statements into questions. And when we get to page 52, the middle paragraph, we're going to begin to talk about 3 ways of looking at page 52, which describes the unmanageability, the spiritual malady, and untreated alcoholism.
Let's continue. It says, to one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience, spiritual experience, may seem impossible. But to continue as he is will mean disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And the book's already discussed to us what the hopeless variety is, craving of the body, obsession of the mind. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, step one, or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. And I talked about this yesterday. Here's why they're not easy to face. Those of us in this room are unsuccessful dying an alcoholic death. We don't even have the power to do that. And we also don't have the power to live on a spiritual basis of life, which is why they are not easy alternatives to face. But then it goes on to say, and it's not so difficult. Half our original fellowship were that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue. Hoping against hope we were not a true alcoholic. But after a while, we had to face the fact we must find a spiritual basis of life or else.
Or else what?
Perhaps it's going to be that way with you. Cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics, but our experience shows you need not be disconcerted. Book's trying to say you can be sitting in here. It was brought up yesterday. No idea of God when I was raised. I'm struggling with God. Book says, doesn't make any difference. You can be a full-blown atheist. You can be an agnostic. Don't worry about it. Just take the action. Don't worry about it. Goes on to say, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, Mark would have recovered long ago. But Mark found such codes and philosophies did not save Mark, no matter how much Mark tried. Highlight that. Mark could wish to be moral. Mark could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, Mark could will these things with all his might, but the needed power was not there. Mark's human resources, as marshaled by Mark's will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So I go back into my experience and say, is this true? Is this true? Lack of power, that was Mark's dilemma. Is this my truth, based on my experience? Mark has to find a power by which he could live, and it's got to be a power greater than Mark. Obviously, well, where and how is Mark to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. The main object of this book is to enable Mark to find a power greater than Mark, which will solve Mark's problem. Mark doesn't solve Mark's problem. He goes in search of a power to solve his problem. And this power will show him how to live.
That's an interesting statement. How many of us have turned this program into a program where enabled us to find a power greater than ourselves so we could solve our problems? It doesn't say that. It says the main object of this is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. The power solves my problems, not me. I don't acquire power so I can solve my problems. Let's go back to the top of 44 again and look at the number of considerations that have to do with powerlessness and unmanageability that we didn't touch in the first 53 pages. First, they start with the two that we did touch, and that is when you honestly want to, you can't stay quit. You can't stay stopped because of your mind. And when drinking, you have little control over the amount, which is about your body. Those are the two that I've conceded to in the previous 53 pages. But now let's look at how much deeper it goes. When I honestly want to, I can't quit entirely. And when drinking, I have little control over the amount. But now I have an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And having faced that, I only have two alternatives: to die an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis. And I can't pull either one of those off. Isn't that really pretty powerless when you can't pull off the only two choices that you have left? And what do I mean by that? No one in this room has been successful at dying an alcoholic death. We're not the ones that are successful. This room is not filled with success stories of those that are able to die an alcoholic death. They're the ones that aren't here. They're dead. So we're failures at dying. Also, the other alternative is to live life on a spiritual basis. We're also the failures at that. Because if everyone in this room could self-will their own spiritual growth, we'd all be doing a lot better than we are at this point. Several of us would have led a group of you off to Israel or someplace by now, right? So my only... Jonestown. Hawktown, right? Joeytown. Right? My only two alternatives, I can't pull off either one. That's why they're not easy to face. We're failures at living, we're failures at dying. Now we go to a deeper level. Having chosen to live life on a spiritual basis, they say, or else. Now, having chosen to live life on a spiritual basis, which I think everyone in this room has chosen to one degree or another, having chosen that, I can't even pull that off. Because if living life on a spiritual basis, or a better code of morals, or a better philosophy of life, or making things go the way I would like were possible, I would have recovered long ago. I can't will these things with all my might. And what you're going to notice in different meetings is that people have gotten off different floors of the first step. And I'd like to say that you go down before you go up. And there's about 5 levels to the first step going down before you're catapulted up to the second step, and that door to the second step opens up. And here's how it goes down. Some people will say, I have a physical craving for alcohol. Some people won't even acknowledge that. They'll just say, hey, I got a problem with low self-esteem. I need to keep myself sober and just not drink and work on myself. Not only are they not powerless over alcohol, but their lives are manageable. And they didn't even go down to the mezzanine. They didn't even go down to the first floor going down. Some people will then concede to, well, I got a physical craving, but I just don't drink no matter what. And they went down 1 floor, but they got off on seeing the physical craving. They got off the elevator. It goes no deeper than that for them because they can keep themselves sober. Then some people will say, I have a physical craving for alcohol and a mental obsession, but now that I know that, I can keep myself sober. And they went 2 levels down, but now they can keep themselves sober, and they got off the elevator. Then some will say, I have a physical craving for alcohol and a mental obsession which confines me to drink again, and in and of myself, on my own power, I'll drink again. But I can make this spiritual experience happen the way I'd like it to. And they talk about surrender like it's something they can make happen. All I need to do is surrender so I never drink again because I have a physical craving and a mental obsession which confines me to drink again. They got off on like the 3rd floor. And now it's going down the page. It's going down the elevator. Now they'll say, I have a physical craving for alcohol. I have a mental obsession which confines me to drink again. And what I need, because I only have 2 alternatives, to die an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, is to live life on a spiritual basis. And I can't even make that happen because lack of power is my dilemma. And they've seen the entire first step. Then you think you've done well in admitting all of that, because, see, they get to our real problem, whether it's bodily, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Whether it's keeping myself sober now that I've stopped, controlling it once I start, making a spiritual experience that I desperately need happen, or managing each area of my life, what's my real problem? Lack of power. This is a condition, and you can mark that, and you can circle it, and you can underline it, and you can put parentheses and exclamation points. That is a condition of body, mind, emotion, and spirit that a lot of people do not want to admit even exists, that it's even possible. It is a state of consciousness, lack of power. Bodily, I can't control booze once it's in my system. Mentally, I can't keep myself stopped from that first drink. Emotionally, I can't control my emotions. And spiritually, I cannot make the very experience I need, the only thing that's going to save me, happen on my own power, because lack of power is my dilemma. Then you think you've done well in admitting all that. You've gone all the way down to the bottom of the first step, and they say, now that we've got you down here, and you see that in each of these areas, bodily, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, lack of power is my dilemma, we're going to go to the middle of page 52, and they're going to take you through every area of your life.
Make a quick note where the book says, where and how are we to find this power? Write page 55 in there. Now let's go to page 50.
Where and how? Where
and how are we to find the power? If lack of power is our dilemma, and the book says it's going to tell us where and how,
and that's obvious to you,
then you need to. I'm trying to point out to you where it's going to tell you you're going to find the power and how you're going to find the power. I think it's important to know that. If lack of power, it's on page 55. It's where it's going to tell us. Now let's go to.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. In the second step, they will answer their own question from 40.
Where and how? Yeah.
On page 45. She means where's the question? 45, not 55. The paragraph starts off, lack of power is our dilemma, but we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than myself, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? They'll answer that when we get to the end of step 2.
Now,
let's go to page 52.
Middle paragraph. Now, as we read this, I want you to consider some things Joe talked about. Here's what I want you to consider. This paragraph is going to describe unmanageability, and what we all need to consider is that it is an internal condition, and nothing external will ever treat it. Nothing external will ever treat it. Money won't treat it. The right man or woman won't treat it. The right job won't treat it. The right house won't treat it. Living in the right state won't treat it. I mean, we were just kidding Susie about this yesterday. She still has some old ideas about what's going to treat this. You see? That's a continual journey, stripping away old ideas about what you think is going to treat this. So now let's see what it says. Mark has to ask himself why he shouldn't apply to his human problems this same way as to change his point of view.
As he takes us through this the first time, let's look at this paragraph in relationship to you on your own power. So before each time he takes us through an area of our life, he'll say, on my own power can I...
Okay. So on my own power, am I having trouble with personal relationships?
On my own power, can I make personal relationships go the way I want them to?
On my own power, can I control my emotional nature? On my own power, am I a prey to misery and depression? On my own power, do I have a hard time making a living? On my own power, do I have a feeling of uselessness? On my own power, am I full of fear? On my own power, am I unhappy? On my own power, can I help other people?
Now, I get to face, but I don't think anybody in this room is operating on their own power anymore, or we wouldn't be here this morning. So, but before we get to that, let's bring it back to booze. And the second time through, let's look at if every area of your life was exactly the way you wanted it, would that be enough to keep you sober? So let's look at the times where you had all your ducks in a row. Relationship was going pretty good. You got some power over your emotional nature. Misery and depression aren't really that bad. You're making a living. You're being of help to other people. You're not full of fear. You're not feeling useless. So here's the question. If your life was manageable, would that be enough to keep you sober? And it'll bring you right back to booze, and you'll see even the times. I'll give you an example. When I left the Michigan State Penitentiary, I had a dream. It was a little unrealistic, but it came true. And my dream was I wanted to deal blackjack in Las Vegas, Nevada with a car, a penthouse, clothes, a woman, and jewelry. And a year and a half after I got out of the penitentiary, through some circumstances and where I was taken, I was dealing blackjack at the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada with a penthouse, car, clothes, and a woman, and some jewelry. And I couldn't keep myself sober. So with a manageable life, could I keep myself sober? Now, the third way. He'll take us through one more time, and let's approach it from this angle. This is where we all are now today. See, I got to make all three parts of the first step current, or they'll only be fond memories. Here's what I mean. If looking at the craving is only in the past during those 10 or 15 or 20 years that you drank, then all you've done is see the craving in the past. You must bring the craving into the present by answering this question. Do you believe that craving would happen to you today if you were to take a drink? Then we started looking at the obsession, and I don't want it to just be a fond memory of what used to happen 13, 20 years ago when I drank. I want it to be, do I believe that obsession could happen today? Now with the unmanageability, and here's the one that kills me, and I don't like to say this, but here's the way to look at the middle paragraph on 52 to experience the unmanageability currently in your life today. Here's the way to approach it. With the power and grace of God that I've been given up to today, what do I do with each area of my life with power? So, with the power of God, what do I do with personal relationships? Over any considerable period of time, I run them into the ground. And with God.
And consider the relationship with yourself, not just outside yourself. What kind of personal relationship are you having with yourself
and God
today?
It's better, but herein lies one of my main reasons for doing the work on a regular basis. My ego, and if you want to read the doctor, because there's always a doctor involved in this first step stuff and why do the work again. Silkworth gave us the craving. Carl Jung gave us the obsession. And if you want to read the doctor that knew more about why you need to do this work on a regular basis, is Dr. Harry Tiebout, who wrote a lot of stuff in our history books other than in this book. And it also, if you have a way to order Hazelton material, which I'm sure Glenn knows about. Just kidding. Hazelton puts out a great 4 pamphlets, or I think 4 or 5 pamphlets It's a Harry T-Bolt packet. One of the best ones is Ego Reduction and Surrender, or something like that. And he talks about why you and I need to do this work on a regular. I'm talking 1 through 9, because as you can tell already, one of the big myths in Alcoholics Anonymous around this country is you work the first 9 steps once and you practice 10 and 11 and 12 for the rest of your life. And I'd like to ask those people that believe that, number one, I'm beginning to wonder if they've ever done 1 through 9. Because anybody I've ever met that's done 1 through 9 and had that dramatic change in their life internally and externally, why wouldn't you want to do it again when your life gets a little flat? So I'm beginning to wonder, kind of like I'd like to meet the guy that first said, and I'd like to take him and I'd like to strangle him really slow, the guy that first said, we just don't drink no matter what. Because where I live, they alienate alcoholics like me when they say, we just don't drink no matter what. I'd also like to meet the guy who started, work the first 9 steps once and live your life in 10, 11, and 12. Because you know what they're saying? Practice these principles. They're saying the 12 steps says we practiced the first 9 principles once and lived in the last 3 for the rest of our life. And I'd also like to ask the people that believe that, where in any of the AA literature that they've ever read did any of our founders ever write, you practice the first 9 steps once? I think it's also the main difference between Bill and Bob's experience. As effective as Bill Wilson was, and we all know he was very effective with alcoholics, running that office. I mean, he's one of the founders of AA. The man had 16 years of major depression and did some stuff you don't even want to tell new people about. You're sorry that it's even in Pass It On. I mean, the guy did LSD for 3 years with Father Ed Dowling before it was classified to enhance a spiritual experience. Niacin, Ouija boards, weird stuff, dying of untreated alcoholism because he would not submit himself to what saved his life the first time he went through it. Dr. Bob, on the other hand, because of Harry T-Bolt, who was a major influence on his life, continued to work and rework the first 9 steps on like our great grand sponsor in Chicago, Paul Martin, written extensive articles for the Grapevine. Mark, anybody that's interested in those, Mark can help you get some, and Rick from Chicago could probably get you in touch with Paul if you want some of the articles he's written for the Grapevine over the years on why you continue to practice these principles. But herein lies one of my reasons. Not only because I'm still powerless over alcohol and I need this power to stay sober, but because of what my ego does with power over any considerable period of time. Now, personal relationships are better in my life today than they ever have been, and they always are each time I go through the work. But after about a year, I start to experience this tension, and this relationship really isn't going the way that I want it to, the intent that I had in my heart, and my emotional nature. I start to get a little edge, and misery and depression start to creep in, and I start to get this little tension with some of my friends going on where I live, and I get a little fear going on, and I can't seem to be as effective as I was 6 months ago when I just blasted through the first 9 steps again and was in 10, 11, and 12. And I'm starting to experience some fear, and my happiness starts to change. And intuitively, I know it's time for me to start the work again. And I get to face what I do with power in relationship to page 52.
So you take yourself today, bring this current. Remember we talked about the trap of when I came in and when I came in and when I came in. It's like our bodies are not living off the food we ate last week. So as I read it this time, look at your life. Bring yourself current right now today, regardless of how long you've been sober, and ask yourself this question. With the power and grace that God has given me up to this point in time, how am I having trouble in personal relationships? You want to have a fun exercise, you take a piece of paper and you take each one of these areas and ask God to show you, and you start with yourself. And then you go all around you and take a look. How am I doing in personal relationships today with everybody in my life? Where am I at with controlling my emotional nature today? How many of us in this room have had this said to us? You get angry over such a little thing. How am I doing today with misery and depression? How am I doing today with making a living? Now, making a living is not just money. Am I a good steward? Making a living, making a life. Can I enjoy the day? I'm always amazed about people's lives who are totally dictated by the weather. How are you doing today? Well, it's raining. It's hot. It's cold. I hear. I don't even ask people that anymore. I mean, I wake up, my breath is coming in. wow, what a great day. You think I care what the weather is? I mean, God handles that part. I'm so grateful for anything. But you see what I'm saying? So again, how am I doing today about a feeling of uselessness? Feeling of uselessness. How am I doing right now today without being full of fear? Just go back in the last week. How many times were you in situations and experienced a bunch of fear? How am I doing today with helping others? How am I doing today with being happy or unhappy? To get current with what have I done? That part of me. The book says that we're self-will run riot, though we don't think so. What has my ego done with the power and grace that God has given me up to right now this morning at 11:34, sitting here in Battle Creek, Michigan? Do I think that maybe if I'm willing to submit to this work again, that God can take me into dimensions that I've never experienced before? Do I think that that is possible? But I wouldn't make that decision to do that unless I get current and honest with myself about how am I doing today. I mean, for every person in here in your personal relationships, if you think this is the best that they're going to be, then God is not everything. He's finite and He's limited. My experience is much different than that. My experience is, my relationships today as a result of going through the steps this year are at a level with men and women that I couldn't even have dreamed of a year ago. You see what I'm saying?
You're also going to find that the important stuff you need to admit in step 2 comes from your honest admission about each area of your life when you look at the unmanageability. Let's take a moment and do a little guided meditation and wrap up the first step, and then we're going to stop for a minute, and let's just try and be silent for a moment. Does my experience abundantly confirm that once I put alcohol in my system, something happens which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop? Do I lose control over the amount once I start to drink? Am I convinced that at a certain time there will be no effective mental defense against the first drink, and that neither me nor any other human being will be able to provide that defense? Must my defense come from a higher power? Can I keep myself stopped now that I've stopped? So am I convinced that when I honestly want to, I can't stay stopped, and when drinking I have little control over the amount? And am I also convinced that I have an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer? Having faced that, do I believe I have any other alternatives but to die an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis? And having chosen to live life on a spiritual basis, can I make that happen on my own power? Can I will that with all my might? Or is the needed power not there? So bodily, whether we're talking about the craving, or mentally, whether we're talking about the obsession, or spiritually, whether we're talking about me staying sober and living life on a spiritual basis, or emotionally, when we're talking about being able to control my emotional nature, is lack of power my dilemma? When taken to each area of my life, am I having trouble with personal relationships on my own power? Can I control my emotional nature? Can I make misery and depression go away on my own power? Can I make a living that's satisfactory to me on my own power? Can I make uselessness, the feeling of uselessness, go away on my own? Can I make fear disappear? And can I on my own power make myself happy? And can I on my own power make myself of real help to other people? And if each of these areas was exactly the way I wanted them to be, would that mean I would be able to keep myself sober? Or even with all my ducks in a row and the manageability in my life, and when things have been going the way I want, I still drank. And now I must face with whatever period of sobriety I currently have, with the power and grace that I've been given up to this day, what I do with power over any considerable period of time with each of these areas of my life. And I see my need for power. Amen. Which is step 2. And I believe this is about you and your need for power based on your first step. We're going to use the whole chapter, We Agnostic, from 44 to 57. And I'd like you to continue to turn statements into questions. Mark them in your book and then move through them in prayer and consider them. With each of these chapters that we've covered, when you mark statements that can be turned into questions, once you've marked them, you've only done the mechanics, then go back through them and consider those questions slowly until they're answered by considering both sides of each question. Is it true? Maybe it's not. Focus on maybe it's not. I get a lot more benefit nowadays when I approach these questions. A friend of mine said to me one time, consider a question like a coin. There's 2 sides to every coin. There's 2 sides to every question. And I get a lot more benefit nowadays when I look at these questions from their other side. Let's take a question, for example. Does my experience abundantly confirm that when I put alcohol in my system, something happens which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop? I get a lot more benefit when I look at maybe my experience doesn't confirm that. So there's the first step paradox. By looking at maybe I'm not, I find out I really am. I'd like to now share with you the second step consideration paradox. The second step paradox is if you look at where you don't believe, you can come to believe from a new place. Because my mind says to come to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. And keep in mind, the short form of the step doesn't say we're coming to believe in anything. It's a big leap from coming to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity and coming to believe in that power which takes place later on. I just need to come to believe that. And let me make sure that I'm reading that correctly in the short form. Came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity is a lot different than coming to believe in God. Coming to believe, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, you're going to be able to come to believe in God the same way you came to believe in booze. And that's a great thing for guys like us. So with the chapter, continue to turn statements into questions. I'd like to talk about 3 different exercises. One is to become familiar with the chapter. Read it. And I would say this with all the chapters we've covered so far. Read the chapter cold and just become familiar with the flow of it. Now, we're going to break the second step into 2 halves. Half number 1 is on page 47. Do you now believe, middle of the page, do you now believe or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? That's the first half of step 2. Now, to work with that consideration, you'll find that you can go through the entire chapter and you're going to find words and statements that help you face where you don't believe, so you can come to believe and answer this question. I'm talking about words like doubt and skepticism and prejudice, honest doubt, worship of other things, worship of people, worship of sentiment, worship of money, worship of yourself. It's even going to say that some of us in this room objectively are faithful to the God of reason. We worship our own minds. We think that our thinking is the beginning and the end of all. Nothing more exists than I think. It's the Alpha and the Omega. It's going to say, there's going to be through this entire chapter, and I hate to use the word negative, but they sound like negative statements that help you face where you don't believe. Mark them all and consider them to work with this first half of step 2. Then, we're going to find the second half of step 2 on page 53. Once you see your alcoholic crushed by a self-imposed crisis, you can no longer postpone or evade. You have to fearlessly face this proposition. The second half of step 2. God is either everything or He's nothing. God either is or He isn't. What is your choice to be? So one is a question that needs to be answered, the first half of step 2, and one is a choice that needs to be made. I'm going to give you an exercise that will help you consider the second half of step 2. Go through the entire chapter and look for words or statements that take you from your simple willingness to believe to choosing everything or nothing. By that I mean when you're working with the second half of step 2, this choice, God is everything or nothing, He either is or He isn't. In working with that consideration, go through the entire chapter and mark things that say things like, as soon as He's willing, He's well on His way. This childlike faith was the mainspring of His accomplishment. They're more positive statements that say, now that you've done the first half of step 2 and you're willing, here's how you take that last giant step to choosing. Because I'll tell you, it's a big step, this leap of faith from bridge to shore, this last mile. It's a big step to go from like being willing to be willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself. That first half of step 2, to choosing God as everything. And you'll find both of these exercises helpful in making each of these considerations.
Let me turn to page 45. I'm going to just go over some things. Last paragraph. It says, we know how this person feels. We've shared his honest doubt and prejudice. And circle the word prejudice. You're going to find that word in here 6, 7, 8 times. And they're finally going to reach a place in We Agnostics where they beg you to lay aside prejudice. And again, it means preconceived thought or opinion. Any old ideas I may have about this power, this God. Goes on to say some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of Him with which someone tried to impress us during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this concept because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we'd abandon the God idea entirely. We're bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves is weak, even cowardly. Now, the middle paragraph, page 46. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. So I say to myself, is this me? You put your name in again, and of course they were talking to me. Now, again, I'm going to give you some more promises. Let us make haste to reassure you, Mark. We found, Mark, that as soon as you're able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than Mark, you will commence to get results. That's a promise. And then it goes on to say something I think is important. Even though, Mark, it is impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, and they tell me what that power is, which is God. Mark, much to your relief, you're going to discover you don't need to consider anybody else's conception of God. Your own conception, Mark, however inadequate, is going to be sufficient. Now, this statement's a promise. Is going to be sufficient to make the approach and effect a contact with Him. Whatever my conception of God is, the promise is that I'll be able to effect a contact with Him. As soon as Mark admits the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying totality of things, now look at these promises. Mark begins to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. Now a warning, provided Mark took other simple steps. Mark found God will not make too hard terms with those who seek Him. Highlight seek Him. My responsibility is to seek Him. That's it. What's wonderful about the steps, they give me the course of action to seek Him because I don't know anything about seeking Him. I sought Him in booze. I sought Him in dope. I sought Him in women. I sought Him in money. They're going to give me a clear course of action to seek this power. And it goes on to say, to us the realm of the Spirit, broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding, to those who earnestly seek. Look up the word earnestly. It is open, we believe, to all men. Page 47, when therefore, Mark, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God, including the atheist. This will apply, too, to other spiritual expressions, Mark, you'll find in the book. Do not let any prejudice, third time it's used that word. Mark, do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from asking yourself what they mean. Now here's another promise. At the start, which is where we're at, this is all Mark needs to commence spiritual growth. Let me tell you the journey in the world of the Spirit through the steps. In the second step, I will commence spiritual growth. When I am done with the fifth step, the book says, Mark, you've had certain spiritual beliefs, but now you begin to have the spiritual experience. And when I get to the 10th step, it says, Mark, you've entered the world of the Spirit. So at the start, this is all Mark needs to commence spiritual growth. Now look at this. To affect Mark's first conscious relationship with God. It's not talking about a belief. A conscious relationship with God as Mark understands God. Now I'm down to the question. Mark needs to ask himself one short question. Mark, do you now believe, Mark, or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than you? Now look at the promise. As soon as Mark can say that he does believe or he's willing to believe, we assure Mark he's on his way. What's going to be asked is, are the stones properly in place? How many of you have been sitting in AA and you never knew that the second step was the cornerstone of your whole program? Nobody raises their hand. I don't find that hard to believe. You got to know the stones. The third step is the keystone. You better know what they mean. Because when you get done with the fifth step, here's the question. Mark, are your stones properly in place? If you don't know the second step's the cornerstone, you didn't answer that question, did you? And if you don't know that the third step is the keystone. Definition of cornerstone is a stone at one of the corners of a building's foundation. It is the fundamental basis of something. So the second step is my cornerstone of this spiritual arch through which I shall walk a free man or a free woman. You have any comments on the first half, this step?
I thought for a long time, because I have a very logical mind, I had too much left when I got here, okay? I thought I was going to think my way to God. And logically, you would think, and they even do it in Southern California, when somebody's taken the first step, their sponsor will have them go home and to look at powerlessness, you're going to write where you were powerless in your life. And I found they took what I thought was logical. Gosh, to admit that you're powerless, you should go look at where you're powerless. No, the spiritual way of life says, no, let's look at maybe you're not, to find out you really are. And the more that I kept pushing the envelope, the more that I kept trying to face, maybe that craving doesn't happen, the more it would push me to a deeper realization that that craving does happen. So that with step one, the more I looked at where I might not be powerless, the more I found out where I was powerless. With step two, you would think that to come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity, you should go home and look at how much you believe. Especially after being around for a while. My God, if you've been through the work 4 or 5 times, or 10 times, or 12 times, or 20 times, or however many times you've been through the steps, you would think if it was measurable, and somebody said, how much do you believe after 13 years, you'd say, and if it was measurable, you'd say, I believe this much. My mind says that to have a new experience with step two, if I now believe this much, if I'm going to have a new experience with step two, it should then be that much. That it's always better. More is better, right? And I should go home to face step two and look at how much I believe. And I find the chapter doesn't say, with the first half of step two, that we should look at how much we believe. I think the chapter says I should face and honestly admit to myself where I currently don't believe. There's a word we use in our group, and it's called current agnosticism. And we've had several people at our group come and speak that have done this work before from other cities. And we've asked some of those people, last time through the work, what was some of your current agnosticism? They were like, what? Current agnosticism? What does that mean? I mean, how is it possible somebody with 15, 20 years could have current agnosticism? Because, see, I'm going to say to you that the first half of step two, do you now believe? Or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? That question does nothing for somebody that's been around. You're not given the right question. For somebody that's new, it's a big step forward to just say, I am now willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself. Or if you're a little further along, to say, I now believe there is a power greater than myself. But once you get to that, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, What's it going to do in the first half of step 2 if you ask me, Joe, do you now believe that there is a power greater than yourself? I'm going to say, sure. I got 13 years experience. Even at the height of my ego, I can't take the credit for some of the stuff that's happened in my sobriety. But if you add one little thing to this first half of step 2, it'll make it as current and as challenging and as productive the 20th time as it was the first time. And here's how I now approach this question nowadays. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself that can take me past where I currently am in each area of my life? And then all of a sudden I'm asked the right question and I go, gosh, what I thought I was just sure about, given the wrong question. Sure, I believe there's a power greater than myself. You've been around for a while. You now know what to ask me. You now ask me the right question. Yeah, okay. Put your money where your mouth is. Do you now believe this power can move you past where you are to dimensions of peace and freedom and existence in every area, using page 52 as a guide? Past here, there's more. Because see, if anyone in this room can pick any area of their life, and this is it, this is as far as God is going to be able to bring you, then God isn't everything. He's finite. He's measurable. This is it. I'm talking with freedom from alcohol, any relationship with you're in, your emotional state. I'm talking any area of your life. If this is it, if there is no more past here, God isn't everything. So I'm going to consider with this first half of step 2, last time through the work, the consideration was, could He take me to a relationship where I could spend the rest of my life with somebody? And I found that. I found somebody I want to spend the rest of my life with. Then it was about, could He take the obsession to smoke cigarettes and my fear of the physical withdrawal? Because I thought God was going to punish me and make me go through withdrawal to get off 30 years of Marlboros. And I had to say, gosh, now that you've asked me the right, it's always in the right question. It's never in the answer. You're always going to meet me with the right question, not just continuing to give me answers. When asked the right question, I faced the current agnosticism that I had in my life that time through the work. This time it's about weight and health and being moved past where I am with this relationship. Because I'm currently in a place with this relationship where I'm stuck against every area that I can't go any further in. I'm up against as far as I can take it with the power I've currently been given in several areas of my life. And I'm now going to be asked to face my current agnosticism and admit where I don't believe so I can come to believe from a new place. And I found out with the second step, more isn't always better. And what you think right now, if you were asked how much do you believe, if it was measurable, what the chapter does if approached the right way is say, well, isn't about this much of it really about faith in yourself and your ability to think? And isn't about this much of it about money, people, things, and sentiment? And isn't about this much of it really doubt and skepticism? And what I thought at the beginning of step 2 was, I believe this much, was literally torn down to where I see it's about this much pure belief. And that's really only based on willingness. And I get to move from where I am because I honestly admit if you're in Malibu, California, and you're trying to get to Palm Springs, and you think you're in Santa Monica, you're not going to get to where you want to get because you don't know where you're starting from. You must admit where you are with each of these steps to get moved past where you are. And when I'm at the beginning of step 2, having just seen the first step, if you give me the right question, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than yourself that can take you past where you are in every area of your life on page 52? Then I get to face my doubt, and I get to admit the truth about my current agnosticism.
I'm going to give you an example based on this time through the steps. I'll take the area of personal relationships. That's a good one. And I'll talk about one thing that happened in terms of myself in a relationship with someone else. On May the 9th, I weighed 240 pounds of this year. And at best, I could exercise for maybe 10 minutes. What I will tell you today is that I weigh about 194 pounds, and yesterday I went and I ran for an hour. I will tell you that my blood pressure was 140/90 then, and now it's 120/72. I will tell you that my resting pulse then was 70, and I'll tell you today it's 44. Now, I'll take another relationship outside of the one with myself. And that is that I've been in and out of a marriage for 4 years. Some of you understand that. You get together for a while, separate, get together for a while. And this time through the work, I'll tell you what I was shown, is that woman and I were supposed to have been friends, which was an intuitive thought I had when I first met her. And we took it somewhere it wasn't supposed to go, and we were able to sit down and both reach agreement on that. And we're getting divorced, and we're developing the friendship we probably should have had to begin with. Okay? Are there dimensions that I can be taken to that I don't know exist? Yeah, absolutely. In every single area of my life. There's 4 parts to my being: spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. And every time through the steps, God takes me into dimensions I never knew existed. Okay? Those are just 2 examples. I could go on and on this time through the work of what He's done with me in terms of being a steward of His money. I could go on and on about my relationships with people I work with. I could go on and on about my relationships with men and women. You see, there are dimensions. And when he talks about current agnostic belief system, if this is the best it is for every one of you in this room, then you're limiting the power of God. If I earnestly seek Him, I know that He can take me further in every area of my life than I've ever been before.
Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. What do people think? That's only true the first time you go through step 2? Like you're only an agnostic once? Right? You're only a virgin once, but you're an agnostic on a regular basis. Right? As soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice and express a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results. Here's the one that lets us thinkers off the hook. Even though it's impossible for any of us, that includes me, to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. If I could figure God out, I'd be God. And that also lets us off the hook, those that can't think so well. You don't have to think your way to God. You don't have to fully define or understand or comprehend that power which is God. A lot of people take the step based on God as I don't understand it. And I think the more you get free of understanding, and the more you get free of concepts and words to define God, the more you let Him out of the box to really be everything.
I mean, think how arrogant it is for someone to sit down and say, Mark, I really know the only true God. Think of the arrogance of that. Let me ask this question. Turn to page 49. How many in this room have some prejudice against organized religion? Every one of you better raise your hands. I want to read something out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We who've traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. We have learned whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea what life's all about. Actually, Mark, you used to have no reasonable conception whatever. Mark, you used to amuse yourself by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices, when, Mark, you might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which, Mark, you should have sought yourself. Turn to page 50. Instead, Mark, you looked at the human defects of these people, and you will sometimes use their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. Mark, you talked of intolerance while you were intolerant yourself. Mark, you missed the reality and beauty of the forest because you were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. Mark, you never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Skip a paragraph. It says, on one proposition, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to, now look at the order in which they give us these words. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous. Now I want to go into this next paragraph because it's got some of the most powerful promises to me in this whole book based on my experience. Listen to what it says. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. These men and women declare, since they come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things. Now look at this promise. there's been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found a new power, peace, happiness, sense of direction flowed into them. Now, a warning. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. There's only one requirement to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. There are a whole bunch of requirements if you want to seek God. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why Mark was making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, Mark tells why living so unsatisfactory. Mark shows how the change came over Mark. I worked the steps. And when many hundreds of people are able to say, the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why Mark should have faith.
Two other ideas that have been helpful. Some people, when they're new, and I certainly did, and this chapter was extremely helpful, you need some words to put on this power that you'd like, that would be comfortable for you. God brings up other ideas that were impressed on us during our childhood, and sometimes you need words. Go through, if you're looking for some words to help you with your conception. I'm currently trying to get free of any words to define my conception, because my conception is wordless. And but I needed some to get to this place. And I was told by an old boy in Texas one time with about 40 years of sobriety that if you go through the entire chapter and mark every word that's in capital letters that shouldn't be, you'll find they describe words that one might use for their conception. Supreme Being, the word power, Spirit of the universe, all kinds of words through the chapter that might help you with your conception. I'd also like to describe an experience I had where a man said to me, I could come to believe in God the same way I came to believe in booze. He said, now how did you come to believe in booze? He said, imagine this. Imagine a guy comes to you the day before your first drink. So go back to in your mind, go back to the day before your first drink. And imagine this guy comes to you and he says, son, let me tell you about what this stuff's going to do for you. It's going to make you feel like a man and take you across that gym and ask that little girl to dance you couldn't ask last week to dance. It's going to make you feel like Don Juan. It's going to take your fear away. It's going to make you feel a part of the family you've never felt a part of. It's going to make you feel connected to the world and its people. I would have said to that guy, man, I have no faith in what you're saying. Alcohol is going to do that for me? You're crazy. He says, now let me tell you what alcohol is going to do to you. It's going to destroy you and your family and everyone around you. It's going to separate you from everyone on this planet till there's no one left. It's going to put you in the Michigan State Penitentiary for a couple years. I would have said, man, I have absolutely no faith. So how did I come to believe in booze? I saw that it worked in others. I thought it might make me feel good. You said it worked in you. It might work in me. I made a decision. That by itself was nothing. I then had to take some action. I got some results that I could see, feel, use, and direct in my life, and I came to believe in booze, forsaking no one. More important than anyone in my life. Right? I put it before everything and everybody. And it did all those things and more for me, and it did all those things and more to me. I came to believe in booze. You think you're having trouble coming to believe in God? Look at some of the strange higher powers you've already believed in and ask yourself, do you really have a problem with faith? Because I have believed in booze. Matter of fact, they're the only two powers in my life, and I'm either headed toward one or the other at any given moment. I just don't. I think there's some middle place. You're either headed toward the power of booze or the power of God at every moment. Like I said last night, you're either going to be headed toward spirits or spirit. So how do you come to believe in God? Man said to me, I would see that it worked in others. I would come to believe that it's worked for you and maybe it would work for me. I'd make a decision at step 3. I'd take the action in steps 4 through 9. I would get some specific results outlined in the promises in those steps later on. Then I would come to believe and I would have faith. I've come to believe in God the same way I came to believe in booze. Decision, action, result, faith. We're going to do the same thing with the steps.
Page 52, I wanted to just read the paragraph under the unmanageability. When Mark saw others solve their problems, that's plural, by simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe, Mark had to stop doubting the power of God. Mark's ideas didn't work, but the God idea did. So page 53. When Mark became an alcoholic, crushed by a self-imposed crisis Mark could not postpone or evade, Mark had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else God is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was Mark's choice to be? Now, the self-imposed crisis the book's told us is called lack of power.
And I believe you'll get more benefit with this proposition by looking at, now that I've seen step 1 and a little bit of step 2, and I've got this willingness to believe that God can and will if I seek him. I believe it's more beneficial to look at, what if God is nothing? What if there is no God for me? What if there is no power for me now that I've seen step 1? And I believe that'll squeeze all the virtue out of making this choice.
Turn over to page 55. I want to read 3 paragraphs starting with, says, actually, Mark's fooling himself. It's another nice word. It reminds me of spiritual ignorance. For deep down inside every man, woman, and child, in every man, woman, and child, is the fundamental idea of God. The fundamental idea of God, may be obscured by calamity, right? External problems we bring to meetings. By pomp, I'm God. By worship of other things, money, women, career. But in some form or other, this fundamental idea of God, is there. For faith in a power greater than Mark, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives, are facts as old as man himself. Mark finally saw faith in some kind of God was a part of Mark's makeup just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. See, here's what I know today. There isn't anybody in this room, including me, who's any closer to God today than the day they came into Alcoholics Anonymous. The only thing that happened is as a result of some work, and the hopelessness of step 1 is there's been a shift in your perception of something that's already been there all the time. Now, it goes on.
You stole that from me.
It goes on to say, I give him credit 3 times and then it's mine. So I gave him credit 3 times, it's mine now. It says, Mark finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of his makeup as much as the feeling he had for a friend. Now here's the sentence that tells me how I'm going to find the power. Sometimes Mark had to search fearlessly, but God, was there. That's how I'm going to find the power. Remember the book said where and how? This is how. I got to be willing to search fearlessly. Got to seek him.
Isn't that interesting? They use the same words as in the 4th step.
Yeah.
As to how. Now they're going to tell you where.
God, was as much a fact as Mark was. Now the next sentence tells me where I'm going to find this power. Mark found the great reality deep down within Mark. In the last analysis, the great reality, God, is only there. It is only there that he may be found. It is so with us. Finding God, deep down within Mark. See, that was wonderful news to me. I don't know about the rest of you, but when I look back at my experience, it's unbelievable the places I look for God. The last place I expect to look for him was deep down within myself. The book said, Mark, in the last analysis, it's only there you're going to find God. I've worshipped everything in everything on the planet, I think, with the exception of God, including the fingers of AA. The book, meetings, sponsor, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This is about worshiping the power, worshiping God.
You come to the program and you're new, and I hear people say, read the book, get a sponsor, work the steps, and go to meetings. And my mind says, get a sponsor, read the book, work the steps, and go to meetings. Those are the things which will keep me sober. But you all never said that. Well, some of you said that, but not the people I knew. They didn't say that. They just said, read the book, get a sponsor, go to meetings, and work the steps. So I go to 90 meetings in 90 days. That was the big thing in Denver. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And then I reached this place at 5.5 months where I'm dying of untreated alcoholism, a part of the disease I didn't even know I had. And I asked Don to be my sponsor. And I said, Don, you said get a sponsor, read the book, work the steps, and go to meetings. And I've seen people drink doing all those things. People that went to more meetings than me, drink. People that knew the book inside and out, drink. People that spent more time with their sponsor, drink. People that work the steps and forget a few simple things, like they're not the ones doing it. Drink. He said, dummy, we didn't say all those things would keep you sober. We hoped all those things would get you in touch with that which would keep you sober. Why don't you quit worshiping the fingers and look to what they point to?
Now let's read this paragraph again and see if we've stripped away some spiritual ignorance. It says we can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, remember the set-aside prayer, lay aside everything I think I know, enables me to think honestly, I need power. My God, I've seen my truth in step one. I need power. I need God. It encourages me to search diligently within myself, do the rest of the steps, because the journey is 4 through 9, starts inward and goes outwards. Now look at this. Then if you wish, you can join us in the broad highway. Look at this next sentence. With this attitude, mark, you cannot fail. It is an absolute 100% guarantee if I have this attitude. I've seen my truth in step one. I'm willing to lay aside everything I think I know. I have faith that this program, if it worked for you, will work for me. With this attitude, Mark, you cannot fail, and here's why I can't fail. The consciousness of my belief, my relationship with God as I understand Him, will come to me. I heard this not long ago, and I really had to consider it and think about it, and I believe there's a lot of truth. We read in another book that the rain falls on the just and the unjust, falls equally, right? So there's this thing about grace. Well, God's grace falls equally on everyone in this room, so what's the difference? Maybe. The difference is some of us in this room are willing to seek that grace because of our truth in step one, and maybe some of us aren't. And maybe some of us are continually willing to keep seeking that grace because we need it so desperately. This was in conjunction with another thought I had, which I may or may not have read. I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. Here was the thought I had that came to me one day in meditation. The only thing that God doesn't have for me is the only thing He wants, and it's the only thing that I can give Him because He has everything else, and that is my love. And I give Him my love by seeking Him.
I believe He gave me that in the first place to give to Him. But is it possible there's a night and day difference between receiving the grace of God and experiencing it and a conscious contact? What do you help a man who comes to you with 24 years or 30 years or 27 years? People I've worked with in this program that with long periods of sobriety who've hit the wall with the unmanageability and their life's a mess and they're ready to do this work for the first time. How do you help somebody see that they haven't experienced grace? Of course they have. No one in this room that's 2 hours from their last drink, or 2 days, or 2 months, or 2 years. No one in this room hasn't experienced the grace of God. There's a slogan in South Central Los Angeles in the AA program that says, grace is sufficient. I don't believe that. I believe everyone in this room would not be here today if they haven't reached a place where the grace of God by itself is no longer sufficient, and they want something much deeper. I don't think any of you'd be here interested in this big book, because you're all experiencing grace. 2 years, 2 months, 2 days, 2 weeks, 12 years, 15 years, 17 years. We've all experienced the grace of God. But you can't do nothing with grace but experience it. You can't transmit it. You can't give it to someone else. You can't tell anyone else how you got it. You can't control it. You can't move it around. You're just kind of moved around from place to place with this wonderment of how in the world are you sober. And the grace of God is a wonderful thing to experience. But is it enough when somebody is going for a conscious contact? And I believe this man at 24 years or 24 days or 24 hours or 30 years, they needed to experience a conscious contact, which is like night and day. A conscious contact you can see, feel, use, direct, show people how you got it, precise directions on how to get it, transmit it to others, and you can do something with it in the 10th and 11th and 12th step. You can move it around, you can use it, you can abuse it, you can misuse it, you can have fun with it, you can get serious, you can get rigid, you can do whatever you want with it. You're going to pay a price, you're going to learn some lessons. Whether it goes the way you want or it doesn't, you're going to learn, you're going to grow with it. But a conscious contact is night and day from having the grace of God in your life. It seems like we've covered a lot. It seems like a lot of complicated stuff. I'm going to say to you, and I'm going to ask Mark to take us through, we're going to end before lunch with a guided meditation from the doctor's opinion to the end of We Agnostic, basically covering. He's going to take us through the first two steps that we've covered. But I'd like to say to you, we've really only covered 5 major considerations. What happens to you once you start to drink? The body. What happens to you when you stop drinking? With your mind. What happens to you before and after alcohol, except when it's working? With your spirit. Are you willing to believe, and have you answered a simple question that you now believe, or you're willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? And are you ready to make a choice somewhere between the time we break for lunch and the time we come back, each in your own way, choose that this power is everything? Or to do the work from a place and take the third step based on God is nothing as a pure skeptic. It doesn't say there, if you choose God is nothing, you're bad and you can't go on. It says it's a valid proposition. There's people around this country that have done the work as a pure skeptic. Show me. Because I'm going to choose God as nothing, but I'm going to base the work and I'm going to do the rest of this work based on that. To me, I've never chosen that. The first step is always squeezed out, and I've kind of always taken the second step like this. God is either everything or I'm nothing. God either is or I'm not. We've really only looked at 5 major considerations. So, if you wanted to do a quick review in the time we're going to have for lunch, I would pause at the top of 23. I would pause at the bottom of 43. I would scan real briefly 44, up to the middle of 45, and focus on the middle of 52. Just kind of sit with your first step. This is my first step, body, mind, and spirit. Then if you feel so moved, I would pause with that first question on 47. Do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe? And then sit with that question on 53. Your choice. And make it. God is everything or is nothing. And you will be in your own consciousness up to where we are. So let's do a little meditation, and we'll go to lunch, and we'll come back at 2 o'clock.
Some of the things that may help a little in the meditation, if you'll just sit with try and have your spine straight and your feet on the floor. Maybe just fold your hands in the lap. Again, keep the spine straight, maybe.
This doesn't work.
No. Yeah.
This doesn't work. Right?
Yeah. Just kind of have them folded in your hands. Maybe focus, say, right between your eyes. They call it the spiritual eye. And we'll do a guided little meditation, and then we'll follow that with about a minute of silence. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together as a spiritual body. And we all came here for different reasons, but I think probably at the heart of it all is our desperate desire to seek a deeper relationship with you. So be with us, Father, and help us to look at our experience to discover our truth as we take a look at what we've covered in this material so far. Father, we looked at the idea of step 1 about being powerless over alcohol and that our life is unmanageable. And we broke that down, Father, and the first thing that we had to look at was, do I have a craving for alcohol? Is it possible, Father, that I have an allergy for alcohol which dooms me from now till the day I die to never being able to control it? And then if I ever take it so much as one drink, Father, then the drink will take me, and I don't know where that is. Help me to go back into my experience, Father, and to see the truth of that. And then, Father, having looked at that, and maybe having looked at my experience and seen the truth of that, and knowing that it abundantly confirms it, maybe my experience also shows me, Father, that even knowing that, I don't have the power to stay away from a drink. And that maybe, Father, that the main problem I have centers in my mind rather than in my body. And maybe, Father, that I have lost control when it's in my body, and I've lost control when I'm sober, because I get driven back to it, regardless of want and need and desire. Let me go into my experience to once again experience the truth of that I have lost the power of choice in drink, that I have no mental defense against the first drink, Father, that there is no power in me to think through the drink, that I can't pull that up and muster that up if I think of consequences that I've suffered, Father. And maybe, Father, regardless of how long I've been around this program, maybe that's a state that I'm in, and I need to get in touch with that again. And then, Father, we looked at several different examples of alcoholics to look at this mental obsession. Because, again, the main problem centers in the mind. My mind has to tell me something before I'll put that drink into my body and activate that allergy. And maybe, Father, knowing the inner workings of my mind will do nothing to prevent me from picking up a drink. And maybe being free from alcohol for a long period of time will do nothing from preventing me from picking up a drink. And maybe, Father, when it comes to that first drink, I suffer from the lack of proportion and ability to think straight. And length of sobriety, Father, has nothing to do with me suffering from that. And is it possible, Father, that I'll reach a place where I'll go into a strange mental blank spot, where all the self-knowledge and willpower will be totally unavailable to me? And I get to the bottom of page 43, Father, and I look at my experience to once again see my truth, that at certain times I will have no effective mental defense against the first drink, and that my defense must come from this power greater than myself. So now, Father, I'm faced with having looked at the fact that I have a physical allergy and a mental obsession of the mind, and there's no power that I can bring to bear to treat that, and that I'm suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And Father, we looked at the idea of the unmanageability and a spiritual malady in untreated alcoholism as being an internal condition, Father, and that the manifestation of that is that I have trouble in personal relationships, and that I cannot control my emotional nature, and that I'm a prey to misery and depression, that I cannot make a living, that I'm full of fear, and that I feel useless, and that I'm unhappy, and that I cannot seem to be of help to others. And that is the condition, Father, that I have treated with alcohol. And I'm told in this book that when that malady is overcome, I straighten out mentally and physically. And now, Father, I've had an experience that's seen my truth in step 1, that I have an illness of body, mind, spirit. And since I know that I have a spiritual illness, Father, no human power can treat it. And that brings me face to face with the fact, Father, that I'm doomed to die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis. And again, Father, I understand based on my experience I have the power to do neither one of those. So I'm faced with lack of power being my dilemma. Now I have to look at the idea, Father, of where and how am I to find this power. And now I come face to face with the idea that am I willing to believe there's a power greater than myself, Father, or do I now believe? And I came to that question, Father, based on my truth in step 1. And if I've been sober for a period of time, let me add to that, who can take me past here in every area of my life, Father. And in your great love for me, you allow me to come up with my own conception of that power. I don't have to take anyone else's. You're very gentle and very loving with me in that regard. And now I come to the place, Father, of fulfilling the promise that if I'm willing to meet a few requirements and go through this process, that the way I live and think will be revolutionized, and I will be given power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction if I have you as the central fact of my life. So now I see that I'm faced with a self-imposed crisis, Father, and that crisis is this. The lack of power is my dilemma, and I've got to choose to make you everything or make you nothing, Father. And so I sat with that decision, Father, and for me the choice is that you're going to be everything based on my truth in step 1. And then it was pointed out to me, Father, that where I'm going to find you in the final analysis, and in the only analysis, I'm going to find you deep down within me, but I have to be willing to search fearlessly. And you introduced me to an attitude, Father, that guarantees that I cannot fail. And that attitude is that I ask you to help me lay aside everything I think I know about you and myself and my disease and these meetings, for an open mind and a new experience with all these things, that you help me think honestly, Father, and help me to see the truth, for you are truth. And if I'm willing to do that, Father, that and search deeply within myself, with this attitude I cannot fail, because the consciousness of you, the awareness of you is sure to come to me, Father. And over again, Father, in this second step, we've looked at the idea that my responsibility is to seek you. And so I close this second step, Father, asking myself this question. Based on my truth in step 1 and everything I've experienced up to this point in time, Father, am I willing to seek you? I know that the book says, and I believe it to be true, that if I'm willing to seek you and reveal myself to you, you will reveal yourself to me. Do I need you in my life, Father? Do I need the power? Amen.
Must come back at 2 o'clock.